Welcome to the Echo Essentials podcast.
I'm Scott Clark.
And I'm Dave Dale. And today's podcast is actually not as dark and depressing as it could have been. We're talking about suicide with the doctor.
Well, something you and I talked about that we came from our former careers, and that it was something we never talked about, and it needs to be talked about. And the irony is that everything you hear now is like, we need to talk.
Yeah.
But when it came to the media, well, we can't talk about that.
Yeah, we can't report that.
Don't
tell those stories.
Can't talk about it. So just before we get into it, because there was a couple of things I want to know from you. It was a council meeting a week or so back. Don Rennick was he thrown out?
Well, actually, I went back and I looked at the YouTube video of it to try to figure out what happened there. And it was an interesting exchange, and it started the same way that his previous presentation went, where he was saying that I wanted to meet with the mayor and I didn't get an answer back, right? And Peter stopped him at the first time and said, hold a sec, I replied to that email. We wanted to meet with you. And Don admitted, somehow it went to his junk and he didn't see it in time and the timing, blah, blah, blah. And Peter was just like, I just want to correct the record. You keep saying that, we didn't respond, and we did, right? So, and so Don went there again on this one. He started off that way. He said, I tried to meet with the mayor over this stuff. And Peter was like, that's not true. I want to point of fact, we did respond. And Don was trying to say, well, no, you didn't, because I still wanted to meet, and then you didn't. We didn't. I don't know what. It was weird. And then the audio goes off on the YouTube recording of it, so I never really got a full understanding. I wasn't there of the exchange. But at the end, Peter was saying, all you have to do is apologize, and you can stay.
Oh, so why the audio go off? Or you probably
I haven't figured it out yet. I'm going to follow up with the city guys and find out exactly what happened with it. It may have been just because he was getting up and he was getting upset and he didn't hit the mic, or some way to turn off his mic. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't have a full understanding. Because he might have been
combative.
But Peter was at the end of it. If you go back and watch it, he was saying, "No, really, you can make your presentation. You just you got to apologize for calling me a liar." Right? Kind of thing. Because I did respond. And he has a point. I don't know what Don's further points are, but he got in a bit in a huff and he said, no, I'm leaving. So he kind of pulled himself out of there, I think, more this time than previous time.
Well, I want to give praise to Peter then, that he
standing his ground on point of fact.
Yeah, well, of course, but hey, you just have to apologize and go on with your presentation. Then it was Rennick that took off. Now you've covered city council a long, long time, and probably a long, long time covering Don as well. Why does he need to? I know you're not inside his head, but why does he need to be so combative when he could just, if he has his facts that he wants to get out, just get your facts out as opposed to being so combative?
Well, he has a special charm. Yeah, this is true. And I don't understand why sometimes he wants to couch the things the way he does, but he does want to couch them with words. And if you really look at the definition of the words, and his intent, it's not quite like it's being received. When he says that staff misrepresent or mislead, he's not necessarily saying that they're doing it on purpose and manipulating the situation. He's actually saying they're incompetent, and he thinks he has a right to say that. Mm-hmm. Something like that, right?
Interesting. So let's get into this interview, and the reason why it's a longer interview, but it's really good. But I do want to acknowledge Peter for a situation where someone's coming in hot and he's trying to calm the situation down, with fact, and it's like, let's calm this down. And because you never know what's going on in someone else's mind, like when someone's having a terrible day and when they're coming in hot, and how you can sort of like, okay, let's find out what's going on so we can kind of calm this situation down. So I want to say congratulations for that, Peter, and good on you.
And I'd like to add that, he could handle it a lot worse.
Look at you. Oh, well, you know what? That's progress. That's progress, Benny. That's progress.
Yeah, he's not throwing gas on that particular fire.
I think Dave Dale just marked the time and everything. Actually complimented Peter Chirico. I believe that's what just happened. So I'm super excited about that.
Well, the definition of worse, he could have handled it worse. It could be taken two different ways. But anyways, I'll take what you said.
And I'm going to take it as you making one little step in the healing process of the Dave Dale, Peter Chirico saga. Congratulations.
And now a word from one of our great sponsors, Casey's.
This weekend, make your way to Casey's Restaurant in North Bay for an unforgettable get-together. Dive into our delicious appetizers and enjoy the best drafts in town. It's the perfect spot to unwind, catch up with friends, and savor great flavors. Don't miss out on the fun. Join us at Casey's for a weekend filled with good food, great drinks, and even better company.
Today we have Dr. Sachiko Nagasawa.
That's right.
Of Bay Psychology. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be talking about something that people should be talking about more, suicide, anxiety, and how you can find hope. And thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for
having
me.
It's very timely for you to be available for this. I know you're very busy, but we have the Chat for Chad coming up this Saturday. And it's a fundraiser for, Scott, tell me more about Chat for Chad.
I'm actually emceeing it, and they haven't actually brought me into like all the details for the event, but we will have a meeting this week. But really, it's about Chad Ringler, and help me here as well. What is the proper language when I say Chad? Death by suicide? Is that what I say? Yeah, and so his family has really leaned into we need to talk about this. Chad was this really vibrant young man who had the whole world in front of him, but inside there was a lot of things that he was processing and not processing. So we need to talk about this more. So the money raised will go to through the hospital to help with mental health and supporting mental health issues within our community. It's a wow, they sold out in like 20 minutes, like 400 seats at this thing. It's going to be massive up at the hangar at the airport. So
we had a great podcast. Chad's brother and Mr. Deacon were in with Lisa for the to North Bay with Love.
I learned a lot from that. Yeah, it's really
so
good.
If you listen to that podcast right there, you'll get a lot of the background and the reasons why they're doing this and where the money's going.
So when we'll actually let you talk at one point.
I'm enjoying this.
we're trying to lay the foundation for the discussion.
Dave and I I was a broadcaster for 20 some years, and Dave was a journalist and continues to be a journalist for 30 years. And we had this conversation after some recent things that have happened in the city. It's like there's this unwritten rule within the media that is you do not talk about suicide. You do not talk about death by suicide. It's not reported on. The irony in that is that that's all we hear today is that we need to talk about this. And so I'm really grateful that you came in, and because I know I have friends that see you. I've heard some incredible things about you and the work that you're doing with PTSD. And so tell us a little bit about, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but why is it that there's this unwritten rule that we shouldn't talk about it, yet we need to?
Yes, it's a great question because we hear about talking about this month is Mental Health Month, this idea about raising awareness, reducing stigma. But there's this experiential avoidance of, I don't want to talk about something and cause somebody distress. What I'm seeing that's a problem in terms of mental health right now is that we've self-selected certain emotions to be good. Like we should feel happy, we should feel calm, but we shouldn't feel anxious. We shouldn't feel sad. We shouldn't feel anger. So if you're feeling anxious, go out and buy that essential oil, like feel happy right away. And this idea that actually the whole idea around mental health is not just to feel happy all the time. It's actually to recognize what you're feeling in the moment, and hopefully it matches the situation, and that you have the skills to effectively deal with it. I have a story of like my daughter the other day. I scolded her because she wasn't being nice to her younger brother on the way to school. And she's such a feisty, bright little being. And she said to me, "Mummy, well, I thought your job was to make people happy." I laughed because I knew it was a total dig at me because she wasn't happy with me. And I said, "Oh, well, no, that's actually not my job. The idea is that when people feel happy and joy, they actually experience it. And they're not like, when is this going to end? Or am I deserving of it? But that they also recognize all the feelings, because that's essentially what emotions are. Emotions are to motivate behavior. They're just a signal to guide us. And so this idea of if somebody is having a thought that it'd be better if I wasn't here, or, I thought that all this pain would go away if I just die, that actually is something that there's been a signal ongoing that has been numbed out and not listened to for a while. So if you think about mental health as like a traffic light, green light is I'm doing well, I'm sleeping well, I'm socializing, I feel pretty good. Yellow light is that amber light, like slow down. Maybe you're drinking more than you should be. Maybe you're withdrawing. But red light is, things have to come to a full stop. And this is often when professional intervention is needed, where it's like, I feel so psychologically overwhelmed with all the problems that my brain, which is just an organ to solve problems, says this is a viable solution. So the idea around mental health is talking about all the emotions. So we don't just share and come out when we're feeling happy and joyful, but that actually we allow other people to bear witness when we're feeling the emotions that we don't try and befriend. Mm-hmm. So those feelings like envy or jealousy or sadness.
Is there, this is we might be here for a bit. There's so many things to touch on. Is there groups that are more susceptible to mental health issues? So I'm talking like male, female, teenagers, maybe elderly with dementia thing. I don't know.
Yes, so there are different risk factors, and they differ depending on demographics, social location. Actually, Dr. Sherry Madigan, who's a clinical psychologist, she used to work at Sick Kids, I believe, but now is out in Calgary and has roots here in North Bay, published a study in 2023 about ER visits to pediatric, like ER presentations around suicidal attempts or suicidal ideation, and the increase dramatically in youth particularly. So I think the study was looking at between the years of 2020 and 2022 and saw a real marked increase, about 22%, which is significant. There's also some research out of the CDC, which is in the States, that looks at demographics. So what that research has shown is there's actually increases of suicide attempts for youth, in particular youth of color, youth that belong to the LGBTQ plus population, as well as Indigenous youth. Actually, in Canada, one of the last stats that I saw was that it's a leading cause of death for Indigenous youth, suicide. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there are risk factors. We could talk about that if you would find that helpful. And also what I want to recognize is that when we talk about these risk factors, the population that's studied is pretty homogenous. So there are actually differential risk factors for different groups, but kind of the overarching ones that people talk about to be aware of is chronic insomnia. So when there is sleep disturbance, so if somebody's not sleeping, if you're not sleeping, nothing's working well. And your ability to regulate emotions or impulse control, if there's substance use, so then sometimes people get into the bad habit of starting to drink to fall asleep, but alcohol affects the architecture of sleep, where you can fall asleep, but you don't have a restful sleep. Social withdrawal, so not, leaving your room, not leaving your house, not engaging with friends. Any changes in academics for youth. For adults, it's changes in workplace performance. Significant losses is a risk factor. So that could be a relationship breakup, a marriage ending. Another significant loss is losing one's job. For youth, it could be also like not getting into a school that they wanted. For adults, it could be a promotion. So significant losses. Other risk factors are appetite changes. Things that need like immediate focus is when we're thinking that somebody's, as I was saying before, mental health is your emotions actually match the situation. When somebody's having a psychotic break, it doesn't match. So there is, they might be talking to themselves or hearing things that aren't really there. That's when it's really acute and somebody's having a psychotic break, and it's a real risk factor as well. So those are off the top of my head some of the risk factors to be aware of in terms of putting people at increased risk. Mm-hmm.
On the flip side of that, and I know you're big on hope is the cure for a lot of our despair. And during COVID, when there was a heightened anxiety amongst many, but specific groups, young for sure, you developed the book Tolerance for Uncertainty, a workbook. And I was just skipping through it a little bit this morning, and it gives you a little bit of a playbook on how to get yourself stabilized.
That's right. Yes. So that was during a time I created that at a time when we knew we were going into a lockdown. It was like right at the beginning of March 2020. And as psychologists, we're trying to kind of give the people we work with some resources, and we're just kind of throwing all these like pamphlets at them. We're like, do this, do that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put this into a document that will actually be something that somebody can work through. And it actually uses a lot of the theoretical approaches from dialectical behavioral therapy. So that's DBT. And it's a form of treatment that was developed by Dr. Marshall Linehan in the 80s to treat individuals that had chronic suicidality and self-harming behaviors. And that's an area that I did a lot of work at when I lived in Toronto during my residency at Ontario Shores, a Centre for Mental Health. That was an area that I worked at the self-regulation borderline clinic, and then also worked in private practice with the population with youth with suicidality and self-harm. And basically, dialectical behavioral therapy draws on a bunch of skills that are in that workbook. So one would be mindfulness, this idea of, we can't really start to change anything until we come to the present moment. So the past is gone and the future is yet to be, and we have no power. Our only power is right here and now. And that is actually the foundation for emotional literacy. Like, what are you feeling right now? Like, what's going on? And if I can recognize what I'm feeling, then it can tell me, what do I need to move forward? If I'm feeling highly distressed, maybe I need to use some skills called distress tolerance skills to come back down to baseline. Maybe I need to do some deep breathing or, want some really cold water, but something just so that if I'm feeling like an 8 or 9 and out of my stress tolerance window, really I need to come down to a 5 or a 6 so I feel like I have a bit of control. So the idea of these skills is not so that I feel really calm. It's just that I feel like I have more control. And basically what we're doing is just kickstarting our prefrontal cortex, which allows us to problem solve and sequence instead of be really impulsive and in that threat mode. Mm-hmm. Other skills that are taught in DBT are like emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and then interpersonal effectiveness. Like, how do I get my needs met in relationship in a way that my integrity is maintained? And I'm not overly aggressive either, but I can kind of set a boundary in an appropriate way. So those are the skills. And then DBT also a whole comprehensive program. So this is when I was in Toronto, was also phone coaching. So the individuals we work with have a lot of suicide attempts, a lot of suicidal ideation, also engage in self-harming behaviors. And it's phone coaching. So if they're feeling an urge, they essentially call me. And if I'm working with them individually, and then I coach them through, okay, what are the skills you're going to do? So that you don't, do anything harmful that you're going to regret later. And it's a very intensive form of treatment because it's individual work, it's phone coaching, that's 24/7, and then groups. And that's a year-long set of intensive treatment, but it's highly effective. And so those are the skills in the workbook.
How, because we're in the conversations we're having now, we're talking about me as an individual and increasing the tools in my toolbox to get through my days and weeks. And it's my daughter, who works at the beer store, she told me a story last night when she said, Dad, the rudest person I've ever met. I have lots of people come through the door, and this person came in and she was training someone, and people come in with a lot of empties, and it's like he was a little kerfuffled on how many empties and this. And this person, it was a woman, went off, and I don't know if this matters or not when I say the woman, but went off on him. And then my daughter steps in and goes, "Hey, just want to let you know this is his first day, and I'll fix it." And it's like, well, you need to get, and really leaned into the anger. What is it that what I said to her was, she said, I couldn't believe it. I said, yeah, I wonder what was happening in her day that she came in so fired up that whatever happened in the counting of beer cans triggered something. How do we, because today we see in almost all places code of conducts that you never saw 5 years ago. It's like, we will not accept. I went at the Life Labs to get a blood test, and it's like, we will not accept. I'm like, what is going on? So on the other side of things about maybe de-escalating, or someone's, I don't want to say in crisis, because I don't know if the woman was in crisis, but what do we need to know on the other side? This is maybe the talk part.
Yeah. I like that you brought up this example, because it's not necessarily what's wrong with that woman, but what happened? Mm-hmm. What happened? So I think, I was talking to Dave earlier about this idea of hope. A concept that I love is this idea of self-compassion, of being more kind to oneself when we're not doing well. And because I really believe, for this woman, for example, there's all this anger, mm-hmm. And so when we talk about mental health, this idea that her response, the intensity of her response didn't match the situation.
Yeah.
So we know right away something's going on, that it wasn't just that event. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is an escalation of anger, and it kind of spilling over into the public forum where it's just anybody, you kind of lash out at them. And I think there is this increased level, I think there's these residual fallouts from the pandemic that have affected our youth in particular, but everyone, and that people aren't checking in. We're in this culture. Dr. Gabor Mate wrote a wonderful book on kind of the myth of normal and toxic culture. And so some of these ideas gleaned from his work is this idea that we live in a toxic culture around mental health, that people just numb. So it's I feel really distressed, and I'm just going to pick up my phone and go on social media, or I'm going to work excessively. I'm going to take that overtime because when I'm at home and I'm not doing anything, I feel uncomfortable. The idea is if you feel uncomfortable, something's going on. It's that yellow light. It's trying to tell you something, but people distract. They numb with alcohol, with shopping, with work, social media. There's a lot of work around kind of screen use with youth right now. This idea that, when I'm working with a younger person, they say, I don't feel good. Not just a young person, adults. It's when I'm on social media, I really feel inadequate, and I feel like my life's just not as good as other people. It's well, that's a message. Then do you need to continue to be on that platform? So this idea of tapping into what am I feeling? Because we all feel the range of emotions. If I can be more compassionate starting with me, if I can be more kind when I'm not the version that I want, that shows up. Maybe I do something that I'm more harsh with my children, or I'm more grumpy with my partner. Can I be kind and be oh, Sachi, that doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. That you didn't want it to come out that way. What do you need right now? Maybe you just need to slow down a bit. Then I can be more present and kind with others in my life, my family, people I work with, the people I work with. And then I think that has a ripple effect. So instead of being like, what's wrong with that person? It's like, well, let's start with me. And then hopefully I have a ripple effect in my community. And if everybody did that inner work of really recognizing what's going on and have more kindness, and also the common humanity, the idea that we all suffer, we all feel inadequate, we all have pain, then we can work towards shifting that.
You mentioned the cell phones, and we want to talk a little bit more about it because there's been some recent studies that come out about the anxiety increase, and it's linked to the time of smartphones. And what can you? Is it exacerbating an existing problem in society, or is it the cause of problem?
Ooh, good question. I think it's really complicated, so I can't say that it's all about screen time and cell phones. I think we're living in an era of cultural and political and environmental instability, and that just leads to anxiety. I think I work with a lot of people that have an adversarial relationship with their anxiety. Like, I just wish I wasn't an anxious person. I hate anxiety. But anxiety is actually adaptive. Like, if I'm a little bit anxious, then maybe I'll prepare more for that test. Or maybe I shouldn't walk down that dark street if I feel a little unsure. The problem is that when it becomes too high, and what you're talking about is Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which is getting which should get a lot of attention these days. It's this idea that with the development of kids being more on screens, the increased rates of depression and anxiety in our youth. So do I think that's part of the problem? I do. I actually was happy when I heard Stephen Lecce, the Minister of Education, say, there's going to be a ban on cell phone use in schools. I hope that holds weight. Because what we do need is youth that are engaging socially, using those social skills like eye contact and being able to problem solve and not just instantaneously message, hurtful things, but actually take a moment and think about it. But also to have distress tolerance skills. Like, if I had my cell phone when I was back in high school trying to learn some kind of new algorithm, it'd be a lot easier for me just if my cell phone went off and there was a message from my friend to engage in that instead of persevere and focus on something hard. And that's what learning is. It's like having to persevere and go through something that's difficult with attention. But if our attention is constantly taken away from the task, then we never really get fully immersed in the learning. Or we don't have enough attention to, hey, you know what, I'm feeling really anxious about this or uncomfortable. Maybe I need to shift things. I just distract by going on Instagram or TikTok, and then I never actually come back to the problem.
I had recently, suicide was never really close in my orbit. It was always peripheral. You would hear different stories. But recently, there's been something very, very close to home. And when it was close to home, it was incredibly traumatic. I can't even fathom, because we know the people, the family, and what has transpired. And I'll say nobody saw it coming, but of course you play over your head 1,000 times, what could have been different, or how could I have intervened? Can we talk a little bit about the trauma of that? And there's a lot of family, there's coworkers, there's many people in our community that I'm sure maybe come and see you, of the trauma of suicide, of the people left behind. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think so. When something like this happens, and it is a traumatic event, because it's people feel completely like the rug's pulled from underneath them, and they're feeling shocked, they're feeling confused. What I want to normalize is the range of emotions is actually okay. Like, it's to feel angry, to feel sad, to feel guilt, to feel confused, to feel shocked. Like, all in terms of grief after something that happens like this, that's normal. And it is also normal for people to kind of replay Like, what did I not see? What I think, like in terms of youth, like especially adolescents, we know that their prefrontal cortex is just not as active as other parts of the brain, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, that are more of the threat response. So that's why we often hear about youth engaging in more risky behaviors, or are they more impulsive? So sometimes, we can talk about the risk factors, but sometimes somebody makes a decision really impulsively. And so that can be incredibly difficult for those impacted. What I would like to bring forward is this concept that these type of events don't happen in a vacuum. And so oftentimes if individuals like kind of replay the last week, the last fight, the last, text message, there's a whole system that is failing all of us in terms of mental health, that don't allow us to reach out when we're in the midst of a crisis, having these thoughts that it'd be better if I wasn't here. So it's not up to, individuals. I want to kind of release that level of responsibility, because there's whole systems at play that don't allow people, that don't normalize talking about suffering, talking about failure. And if we don't do that, then we don't shed a light on these areas that are dark, that allow people to be seen and to move forward.
But does someone who's contemplating or going through that process, it's interesting you said impulsive. I would think it's not. I would think it's a long process that starts with thoughts, then planning, then potentially planning to execute your plan. Like there's a whole process that's going through your head. And during that time, I think it gets rationalized so that when you get to that point, it makes complete sense. And you're actually doing a favor for everybody around you.
Yeah. So sometimes it can be really impulsive. So like sometimes the risk factors, sometimes there are a lot of risk factors, and sometimes people are impulsive, especially young people, especially if substances are involved. But you're right. In terms of like suicide protocol, like you want to start asking, like, are you having, you're talking about a lot of hopelessness and a lot of despair. Are you having thoughts that you'd be better off dead? Are you thinking about dying? So that's kind of the initial. And if they're like, yes, and it's like, well, have you created a plan? Like, is there a plan, and like, is there an intention? So it's like, are they having thoughts? Is there intention? Is there a plan? And then also, is there access to their plan? And is it imminent? Like, I'm going to go do this tomorrow or today. So those kind of lines of thinking, it would be ideal that this was just kind of mainstream, that everybody knew, like, if I'm concerned, like so-and-so's not talking, they're really withdrawn, like that I can actually have a conversation of, is it so bad that you're having these thoughts, and just normalize it, because the brain solves problems. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, sometimes it gets to a problem that they feel so overwhelmed that it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm so irritable and I'm causing people pain that it'd be better if I wasn't here.
So as a friend or family member, is it, you don't know what's okay and what's not okay. Can I say, like, usually it's, hey, how you doing? Is everything okay? It's sort of like this really open-ended question where you want to know, it's like, hey, have you been planning anything? Like, but I don't know how that conversation plays out. That's a really awkward conversation.
That's where we have to not make it awkward.
Yeah.
Like that, it's like, that all of us feel sad at times. And it's like to have the conversation of, you look really sad. And I think for people, it's also trusting your gut. Like something's off. Like there's something not right today. Mm-hmm. And being like, I don't know. Like it might just be me, but it seems like something's off. What do you want to talk? Or are you having these thoughts?
And I've heard, I think part of your expertise is dealing with PTSD and first responders. What have you seen in your career? I don't remember so many first responders requiring so much support that we've always looked at first responders as they're the, the strongest, the bravest, they're the pointy edge of the spear. Here they go. And they have a cape on and you're seeing more and more that what has anything changed? What has changed? Or maybe we're just aware.
Yes, I think there's increasing awareness. I also think there was a legislation change in end of 2016 to 2017 around post-traumatic stress being seen as a workplace injury. So they didn't have to go through proving that they witnessed a traumatic event at work. Like part of the nature of the work of first responding is going to really difficult traumatic calls. What I want to be clear about is not all first responders have post-traumatic stress injuries, and not everybody develops a post-traumatic stress injury, even though they encounter traumatic events. There's really stages where, like, so a traumatic event is when there's a big limbic response. So it's like really we get activated, our adrenaline is pumping, something that we didn't expect happened. So that level of uncertainty and fear. Afterwards, like, within 30 days, so it's very natural after a traumatic event to have post-traumatic stress symptoms. So that's re-experiencing or even avoidance of the trauma reminder, hypervigilance, distressing dreams, flashbacks, irritability, feelings of detachment. That's all actually quite normal within 30 days. As a psychologist, I'm looking more at past 30 days. So that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness. Is after 30 days, we expect the body to kind of digest that traumatic event and symptoms to remit a bit. But if it's ongoing and it's getting worse, then we know it's a post-traumatic stress injury. Mm-hmm. And so for first responders, it's not just one event, it's accumulation. So I usually use like a filing cabinet analogy of, like, you start your job and, there's a really bad event. You have this big, shiny, empty filing cabinet. You file it away, close the file, and you're like, okay, I can do this. But it's after like 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, that filing cabinet has a lot of files. And then you have another bad call, and you can't close the filing cabinet anymore. Files are spilling out onto the floor.
So it's not just one event. That could be a major, I'll say, scar. It's the accumulation of that makes it spill.
Exactly. And this idea that, you're talking about first responders, there's a shift, but culture shift is slow. And there is this idea of, you signed up for this. This is part of the work, like, toughen up. Like, what did you expect these calls would be like? And a drinking culture as well. And that I'm not that popular when I'm like, if there's a bad call, and that's like, hey, let's all go for a drink. Well, you're actually affecting the body's physiological process of digesting traumatic events. And you're also interrupting sleep. So you're doing two things that actually are not helpful. What they're wanting the community. Because when we're in pain and when we're hurting and scared, we need community. We only heal in connection with others. Mm-hmm. Some people were laughing, like a few friends were like, are you worried that AI is going to take over your job? And I said, well, maybe. I can figure out something else. But it's this idea of like human connection, of like somebody being with you. And this idea of I'm not the only one. And unfortunately with first responders, the reason that I've kind of work in this area is I was working with a lot of people in retirement that were really angry. And I could understand why. It's like, I have worked my whole life for the community, and I can't sleep at night now. My marriage is falling apart. I can't even go to the grocery store without feeling on edge. And it's because of this numbing and constant distraction of things that were difficult, that filing cabinet's overflowing. So when you're not distracted and you don't have work, then you start to focus on those things that you kind of buried away. So my work has often been around prevention. All the way from my doctoral research has been prevention at schools, and then the idea of prevention with organizations of psychological therapy is a reactive treatment. It's when people are really not doing well. And usually when I'm doing an assessment with somebody, they're like, no, this just didn't happen a few months ago. This has been brewing for years and decades. And for people to suffer that long, I think it's an injustice. And I also think it's unfair for people to have retirement and then not feel calm and peace.
Hi, I'm Natasha Leframboise, sales representative with the Leframboise team at Realty Executives Local Group Inc. Brokerage. We are a local real estate team here in North Bay. Our team of sales representatives, Matt Leframboise, Phil Seguin, and Adam Legros, are ready to help you through the buying and selling experience. We have been providing service to the North Bay and area community for over 17 years. Our goal is to provide knowledge, support, and guidance in order to prepare your home for sale, bring it to market using multiple selling strategies, and get it sold. As a home buyer, we have 2 buyer's agents ready to help you find your home sweet home. If you'd like to know more, check us out on our website, leframboiseteam.ca. We are always happy to help.
Just wanted to add a layer when you're talking about first responders and increasing awareness of traumatic events in their. When you were talking about the healing, your brain's healing and sleep. I know a couple paramedics, and there's been a change in their workplace where they're working more hours. There's fewer of them. That probably has a lot to do with that stuff not getting processed properly, would you think? Just the way, I'm not sure how it is with the firefighters. I think they now have 3 24-hour shifts and they're good. I can't imagine that's good for processing stuff in the sleep patterns, but paramedics, I know they feel like they're understaffed and they just have a lot of anxiety about their job situations too. So.
Yes, what I'm seeing across the board, so I work with a group of psychologists that treat first responders in Ontario. And so this isn't just something locally where we're seeing staff shortages. And then the problem then is people working overtime or feeling like they need to work more, or they're working with people that are relatively new. So this is across Ontario. And it's not just firefighting or paramedics, it's police. We're seeing a range, and then that has a cumulative effect on the whole workforce and morale.
It probably has a big effect on their ability to parent, which may translate into their children's issues. I guess it's everywhere, right? It's just that kind of thing. If we can get back to it just a little bit more about the what we call survivor's guilt and dealing with the situation when somebody does take their life. What are the things that you definitely shouldn't do?
Well, as I mentioned before, alcohol, so reliance on substances to numb, isolation. So what is helpful when, and I think you brought up, Scott, this idea of like a trauma, like there is like, there is a post-traumatic stress response. And the idea of like whenever the body is overly activated, it's this idea of uncertainty and fear, is you want to kind of create routine. So this idea of establishing routines in the midst of chaos can be incredibly helpful for healing the body and the brain.
For the people who've had close relations with those that have committed suicide, they should try to really reconstruct their own patterns.
Yeah, this idea of routine, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, healthy, balanced meals, moving the body. So physical activity is it actually should be first-line treatment for depression and anxiety.
It's so true. Can I just say, when I don't exercise, and I haven't the last few weeks, everything's thrown off. When I do, it really is the best drug. It really is. And it doesn't have to be crazy exercise. You do feel better.
Yes.
Sorry, I just need to get that out.
Yes, it's true. No, I'm glad that you bring it up because really it is physical activity is a way of reducing like adrenaline and stress. Like before, kind of if we think about like those hunter-forager communities that our brain really hasn't evolved that much out of, you would see like a bear and or some kind of large beast, and you would have this adrenaline rush like that. Those stress hormones were for acute moments. So you'd have this adrenaline and cortisol, and then the cycle ends by you running away or fighting the bear, the beast, or you're dead and it doesn't matter. But the idea is that completion. But now we're sophisticated in terms of our prefrontal cortex, so we can think about all these terrible things that we can kickstart that threat response. But then if we're just sitting and not actually running it off in terms of physical activity, it just accumulates in our body. Mm-hmm. And then we feel irritable. And then we're like, oh, I'm just like an irritable, grumpy person. It's like, actually, no, you're actually just kind of sitting in stress without, and physical activity is also good for sleep. So it's like all these components helps us regulate our emotions better. Like, so yes, I'm a big believer in engaging in physical activity. Is actually one of my recommendations when I work with first responder organizations after there's an acute, difficult call, is to do some intense exercise afterwards. Because it's like you can't think your way out of something your body feels. So, and also our brain has this negativity bias to think about all the problems and difficulties.
So that's normal that our brains think that way.
Yeah, it's an organ to solve problems, right? So that's why there's a lot of literature on gratitude journaling. Yeah. Is because if I think, so for example, if say I didn't eat breakfast this morning, I would keep thinking, Sachi, like you're hungry. But if now that I've ate breakfast, I actually don't think about it at all. I'm thinking about all the other problems. And so if our brain's constantly bringing to our attention all the problems, then that's the lens that we view like the world. Mm-hmm. Versus like, oh yeah, I did have a great breakfast and I did exercise this morning. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about hope, because I don't think you would continue to do your job if there wasn't hope in it, right? And when the person across from you, that you see the hope, can you talk a little bit just about hope? Because I think when people get into dark places, and that's, I guess, how you describe a dark place, is that you don't see hope. There isn't light. Light is hope, and you don't see it. You're in this dark place, and it's like you can't see any window to open or anything. Tell me about how you help instill hope into individuals, how we as individuals can use hope to our advantage to get out of those dark places.
I think you had an example of one of your patients that came out of your workbook, and it's a long-distance patient.
Yes.
That's a good example.
Okay, thank you. So I started working with a youth. It was probably April 2020, so right during the first lockdown. And this individual, I'll use pronouns she and they and them. They're non-binary. A youth that was in high school at the time, had a serious suicide attempt. Mom contacted me actually because of my workbook and wanted their youth to work with a person of color, although they're in Southern Ontario, so it was all virtual. But during that time, everything was virtual anyways. But this individual felt this real sense of hopelessness. And actually just this past week, we had a session and they were talking about it being like this fog that engulfed them. And she talks about, I could put out my hand, I couldn't even see it. Like it was confusing, it was dark, it was unrelenting. And we shifted around what has changed since our working together. And since that time, she's built community. She has a partner. She has people that are there when she's feeling this sense of fog. But she was like, but it doesn't happen as often. And when it does come up, I can hold somebody's hand. And so this sense of like hope is also in community and in connection. That maybe I don't have the feeling like I can get through this, but I have somebody that will bear witness and be with me and that will have hope for me. And so you're right. I couldn't do this work if it felt hopeless. But what I feel incredibly privileged is I get to do work that I love doing, and I get to bear witness to people's courage of really going to dark places. You know, like we kind of all have those social masks of like who we want to present, but really where the rich material is in our shadow. the parts where it's like, I don't really like that. And if I show you, you might just run away and be grossed out. But it's when you show that, like you can really lean into that and learn from it. So it's this idea that hope is this idea that things can always transform, and also to lean into some of those areas that are difficult, because that's where our richest learning is. I'm actually opposed to this idea around constant success. Like we should be successful in our marriages. We should be successful parents. We should have successful kids and have a successful career. And we're always talking about be successful. But what do we encounter more than success? Failure. Right?
Yeah.
And this idea of like when I fail, I feel totally inadequate and vulnerable and fragile. But that's if I can actually have the courage to lean into when I fail and be like, well, what do I learn from this? It's actually really rich. And also this sense of like common humanity is that we all encounter failure and inadequacy and vulnerability. So if we can connect and be seen at those moments, that creates hope.
And what about talk about vulnerability now? Because I would think when people are in a dark place, that they feel incredibly vulnerable already. Like everything's raw and vulnerable. To go one step further, to be vulnerable with someone else, that's massively courageous. What do you say about how you help? I would think, because you do deal with, I think, military, first responder, all of the biggies, right? And these are very literally strong people, imposing people. How do you help them be vulnerable?
It's a good question. Well, ideally, because I use a prevention-based approach, ideally people aren't, in their darkest moment accessing help. Ideally, it's like, I think of like, I do a lot of like wellness checks for first responders. It's this idea of like a physical every year. Like, let's just check to see how you're doing year to year. So that if there's any shifts, we can talk about it and be, preventative. I think what helps people become vulnerable or allow for it is you meet people where they're at. This idea of like meeting somebody where they're at, giving them time, really honoring. Sometimes it's just difficult to pick up the phone and call. So what I love about my team is that everybody's very compassionate, very kind, and very patient. So even like for the first phone call, the idea is like to be compassionate and kind. Because really people are just wanting that point of contact. Like, and also this idea of testing. Like if I kind of put myself out there a bit, will you pull back or will you judge me?
That's actually, you just helped me a ton. And for a second, I'll use a story about Dave and I. I'm not going to overshare because I'm a bit of an oversharer. You ever seen Old School?
Yes.
Yes. I am that guy. I am Will Ferrell in the scene in the therapist's office. He's like, this is a safe place? Is this a safe place? Boom. You're going to get it all. You're going to get the Mandarin buffet from me of emotions. But Dave, I would say, on the other hand, is someone who I think is a little more guarded in his emotions. He's a journalist. He's grisly. He's handsome. He's smart and grisly.
I shaved this morning.
He did. So you must be pretty special. He doesn't often shave. But there's been a couple of times when Dave really shared with a few of us here just how he was feeling about some things in the past, and they were incredibly powerful. I'm really grateful, Dave, that you shared it. But I really get it right now. You explained that, not that we just sort of listened, right? Are you okay? Okay. We just sort of listened. And now I get it. It's like, it was sort of like we weren't looking to pull anything out of Dave or Dave. It was just in that moment, Dave needed to share this, and we listened to it. And I was really proud of you for sharing and telling what you were feeling and how courageous that is to do that with a bunch of goofballs like us. But you felt safe enough. I felt really good that you felt safe enough that you could share some of those things. So, yeah.
I love that you brought that up, Scott. I think that's a beautiful example of like compassionate witnessing.
Yeah.
That I don't have to solve the problem. So first it takes the individual to have the courage to say like, this is just where I'm at. And actually I run a lot of group therapy, and it's this idea of like just compassionate witnessing of being with others, but it takes courage to do that because it's a risk. You're like, I don't know how this is going to land. But it also, for the person that's speaking, it also like is an honor for those that bear witness.
Yes.
Right. So people are like, oh, I don't want to like impose or take up space, or I don't want them to worry. But actually to bear witness is an honor. Like that's my work.
Yeah.
Is to bear witness.
So I probably experienced some of the endorphins that you get when it's like, oh, I'm bearing witness here. This is really powerful. And one of the things I really appreciated, Dave, was I think I know a little bit of the culture you came from in the journalism world. There's no way you would share like that in a newsroom.
Well, we
smoking cigarettes and...
Yeah, it was different back then, I guess. But it's very interesting how there's been an evolution towards that, because and then through the 90s, 2000s, you didn't want to need counseling, get counseling. It was a mark against you. In certain industries, cultures, you didn't even want to go that route because it would lessen your chances for your career, really. It's changed now a little bit. And of course, they were experimenting with all these antidepressants that made you feel like you wanted to commit suicide even more. So you didn't want to go that route. A person who looked into the options of didn't like the options for sure, right? Because this story was bad. This story was bad. So you just sort of sucked it up. And then, of course, people, Bell, let's talk, and everybody wants to talk. And you kind of would be cynical about that, because in the 90s, they also came up with this, and we talked about it earlier, about the media and the psychologists, and thinking that it's better if we don't report suicides because it might start a rash of suicides. And that's the thing. Everybody kind of agreed. We don't know how to do it properly, and we don't want to light a fire under people's ideations if they're in that thing. And there was an incident in North Bay where there's a series of youth suicides, and there was coverage of it. So it was very close to home here. I never believed in that. I always thought that there should be official reporting of suicides, designations. I know there's issues regarding insurance, and there's cause of death stuff that people want to keep private. But I always found it kind of not disingenuous, but very ineffectual in dealing with the issue, right? Like I know that by the people I've talked to in North Bay that there's been, it seems, more suicides among men and in youth. But you don't know for sure. Can you help us understand if there is more, or even this podcast, is this at risk of I think we've done it in a holistic way where we've talked about hope and there's ways to get out of it, and it was helpful. But does this cause people to think suicide might be okay? And anyways, it's a scattergun kind of question.
Okay, so let me try and see if I can. I think talking about suicide doesn't make somebody more likely to engage in suicidal gestures, attempts, ideation. I think there's more risk not talking about it. I feel mixed about the reporting piece, because yes, there are people that are suffering, and so do they need to have it in mainstream media? But do I think that it's a problem that we're not actually looking at numbers accurately? Because what you don't track, you don't know. There has been an increase in youth suicide, definitely since the pandemic. Certain populations are at higher risk. So those are youth of color, youth belonging to the LGBTQ plus, and our Indigenous population. And the difficulties, if we don't track it, we don't look at the nuanced differences between these groups, and we have all these risk factors, but do these risk factors actually align with each population? So if we don't talk about it, we can't research it, know more, and then move more towards prevention. There's now a federal suicide helpline. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's confidential. You can actually text it. It's 988. And it's like, just like kids are taught, something bad happens, call 911. 988 should also be known.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, but so 988. So it's this idea, like for most people, like if you have a young person or a friend or a family member that you're really concerned about at 3 a.m, you're not, unless you're part of a DBT coaching program, you're not going to be able to call your psychologist or a psychiatrist at like 3 a.m. Mostly you're going to be going to the ER. And it should be treated like a medical crisis, like a heart attack. Like if sometimes people are worried about, they're just, saying that to get attention. Well, you know what? If somebody's saying like, I think I'm having a heart attack, you're not like, well, maybe it's just indigestion. We'll see. Like, hopefully you're alive tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you are going to the ER. And I think people kind of are avoidant of like, I don't want to cause. The concern is sometimes I don't want to cause more stress or anxiety, so I'm not going to say anything. The problem is also the silence of people not reaching out. So people don't want to say the wrong thing, like, how are you doing? So they're like, I'm just not going to say anything. When somebody's suffering and they're in that headspace, they need people to talk. Even if they fumble their words or they don't say the right thing, it's to reach out. Both people that are suffering, but also the community as well.
What's interesting about that comment is, and I've seen it of late, it's interviewers interviewing big celebrities, and they've been going through something or they have big celebrity, and the interviewer will say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And that, as opposed to everybody's pretty scripted, they know what the questions are coming, and that when they ask, "Hey, how are you doing?" all of a sudden they break down. Like, nobody ever asked me how I'm doing. It's really interesting, something so simple, like, but I guess it has to come from a genuine place. It's like you hear, it's like, hey, how are you?
Like, how are you really doing?
How are you really doing?
How are you really doing?
And all of a sudden, boom, it just gets super emotional super quick.
Because we have this social script. Remember when I used to work at the hospital, there's these long corridors and you kind of pass friends or colleagues. Hi, how are you doing? Good. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
It's like nobody's actually like really like,
No.
Do you have like 10, 15 minutes? Like, I really want to hash it out.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of like, no, like really, I want to know, like, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
And giving space. I think the pull is we don't ever have to solve the problem. I also believe people are inherently wise. So this idea that, and sometimes people come to me being like, what should I do? And it's like, this idea of like my lens and my lived experience is limited, right? You have your own guidance. Like, I can kind of come alongside you on the mountain and maybe give you the map and the compass, but I'm trucking alongside you. You're not on my back. I'm not bringing you up. But it's this idea of just really holding space, of being like, yeah, how are you doing? And also being like, I don't have to solve this person's problem. Like a lot of parents, this idea of like emotional attunement with youth. It's, if a kid's upset, sometimes, or anybody, you don't want somebody to jump in and save you. It's like, do you need a hug? Well, I'm lucky because I'm at that developmental stage where like 75% of problems, mom gives you a hug and you're good. And I know this is like short-lived, but it's like, do you need a hug? Do you just need to talk about it? Or do you want me to like problem solve with you?
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's not the problem solving. It's just, I want you to hear and I just want to get it out.
So I've had therapy for many years. So I thought I've been
Me too.
pretty good. But it took years to learn that lesson with my wife. It was like, I constantly just wanted to solve whatever issue. And she's like, finally she says, you know what? Stop it. I just want you to listen to me. And I have these giant ears. I think I would be good at it. But it was like, oh, I don't have to do anything? No, you don't have to do anything. Just listen.
Yeah, there's like
I've gotten better at it.
Yeah, it's a hard skill, and I think what they say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Which I think I'm like, yeah, that's true.
So I want to ask you how you're doing, and the reason I say that is, you're helping people, you help society, you help our community in many different ways, and you help individuals. How is it for you when you see, I'll say, someone who our homeless community, who probably have the trifecta, right? There's, I don't know if it's a trifecta or more, but there's drugs, there's alcohol, there's mental health. These people are in crisis, and you're driving home after a full day. I don't know. What do you see what do you see? What do you feel? I'm sure you want to get out of your car, and it's like, but it's like, this is a lot to unpack. Like, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. It's such a really important question. I think, like you, I've been in therapy for a long time. I also do like a lot of therapeutic work with other professionals that is like really supportive, where I can be very vulnerable. I think when you're in this work and you kind of are absorbing a lot of pain, you have to really take care of yourself. And definitely there are times when I'm like, I was talking to you earlier about like this being mental health week or month. And there's a lot of requests, like, can you speak at this? Can you, do the webinar? And it's a matter of, for me, the way that I take care of myself is I have to become more comfortable saying no. And because I'm a person that I get very excited. I love what I do. I'm very passionate, but I'm also limited in terms of how much energy I have. And for me, I really follow that traffic light analogy of like, green is I'm good to go, and yellow is when maybe I'm a little bit more grumpy. My partner will say like, I'm like a cat with, the tail kind of swooshing. He like always knows like, oh, the cat's out. Is like recognizing that. Like recognizing, when do I need to take more breaks? When do I have to actually say no to a really challenging case, because I have a lot of challenging cases on my caseload right now. And I think it's kind of this idea of I have to hold on to hope. And that the idea that individually, if we do our work, and if we have groups that are healing, that we have a ripple effect in our communities. My goal was always, I lived in Toronto for a long period of time. That was most of my schooling and my clinical work. The goal was always to come back to North Bay, because I wanted to help this community. It's a community I love. But it's a delicate balance. And so, I think like checking in, like, how am I doing, is something that's kind of a daily practice.
And how are you doing when it comes to, and I don't know if this has happened to you. My new therapist, because my old retired, I bought his couch. You'll see it in the...
Okay.
Of course. I spent like tens of thousands of dollars on that couch.
That's very meaningful.
I totally... And first of all, I can't believe he sold it to me. It's like, did I not invest in this couch? But I actually respect it. He made me buy it. It's a good couch. I asked my new therapist tell me about I can't help myself. I have to interview someone. Yeah. Tell me about what's a bad day for you? Like, and he said that, he says when someone doesn't show up for an appointment and never comes back, and then never, ever come back. I don't know if that's happened to you or not, but I can't imagine, like, you are, you're seeing the raw of the raw. You're a frontline worker. And when they don't come back, are you okay?
Yeah, I think that's like, I think that's the power of having a team, is being able to kind of process, like, I don't think that was a very good session. Maybe I missed something, or, there's the ambiguity of it all.
Yeah.
Right? Like, maybe they're like, actually, I feel better and I don't need to come back. Or maybe it's like, that's the personality dynamics don't work. Or
I'm actually referring to if someone took their life and didn't come back. That's what I'm referring to.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That is something that, as like a psychologist and as clinicians, it's a silent mourning. It's silent grief, because there's also confidentiality.
Of course.
So that you have to have a really solid, like, this is why I think about groups, like professional consultation groups and support, because you need that support, because you can't go anywhere else for it.
Well, bless you for doing it, for your work. You do good work. You're changing lives. I know personally that you're really affecting in a very positive way, people in my life. I don't know everybody that you're seeing, but I know a few. Thank you for doing that work. Is there something that you wanted to express, when you knew you were coming in here today? It's like, I really want to make sure I talk a little bit about this too, because this is important to me, that important for anybody that's listening in now.
I think that it's important that we look more broader than individuals when people end their life. That I hope that people don't hold on to that responsibility, that if I just sent that text message, or if I just called, or if we didn't have that fight, there's a whole system that's really hurting in terms of mental health. And we as individuals can shift that, but we also are in that system. So I'm hopeful that we can, as a community, move more towards prevention and helping people along the way, instead of getting caught up in those last interactions, and that people reach out for support sooner than later if they need it.
And how could we get your workbook?
Yeah, it's on my website still. Health Canada translated into French, so it's in French and English.
Nice.
I'll probably have to update it though, because it was done in March 2020.
Okay. Well, we can put a link in there on the. We'll put a link in our feed here so that so people can grab it. I don't know if I'm wrapping things up. If you want to add anything.
It's wonderful. We've gone a lot of different areas, and I think you have given us some hope and some tools and some things to think about in this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming in. Keep doing the good work you're doing.
Thank you.
Hope, everybody. Hope. I'm super appreciative that she came in. You actually try and book an appointment with a psychologist or a psychotherapist. It's like it takes months to get in. Everybody's lined up out the door to get in. So for her taking time out of her busy day to come in and talk to us about, these important subjects and
when I originally asked her, she said she was booked solid through May. I'd have to do it in June, and I said, you know what, this would be a really good conversation to have before the Chat for Chad, if it's possible. So she squeaked time in for us.
So if you're listening to this as it's released, Chat for Chad happens this weekend. I'm going to be on site for it, and I'll let you know how it goes in our next. And
it's a sold out event, but people can still donate, and the money goes towards programs and services that are already existing. It's not creating anything new. And please go back and into the To North Bay with Love podcast, where you get a really good understanding. We had Wade Ringler, the brother of Chad, who had a firefighter in North Bay who had killed himself, and Mark Deacon, whose family have their own issues as far as mental health and that they've experienced, and they know how important this is. So you can still donate.
Yeah. Thanks very much for joining us. That's Dave Dale. And I'm Scott Clark.
Thanks for joining the Echo Essentials podcast.
I'm Scott Clark.
And I'm Dave Dale.
It's funny how that works.